And we are live now. Good morning, Darren.
Good morning, Patrick.
Yeah,
How are you doing?
pretty good. Yeah, like I said, we're just talking about fatherhood, I suppose, and how interesting that is, and not feeding the let's see how would I word it, like the shitty program, I guess, that I was fed, or the dysfunctional program that actually did not serve me. That I know that my parents were doing the best they knew how. But as I grow up to be a father and a better human, I realize some of the way that I was raised was actually detrimental. And so when like interacting with my son and his issues he's having, it's like, how do I just not go off what I know and try to implement new um, parenting tactics and ways of being more compassionate, so he does not have to face the same challenges that I will. Obviously, he'll have his own challenges, but I think it's my responsibility as a father to just like not give him as less bullshit as I can. You know?
When do you feel like that's the most challenging?
I guess it's when like I view, sometimes I'll view him and he'll get like he looks lost. He does. He's obviously hurting and projecting it outwards, and then I feel like I'm good and under pressure though. It's like, oh, it's crunch time. So like, how do I navigate this? There was actually one thing that I was super proud of myself. There was an altercation between me and another guy in front of our children, and the guy was dating their mother, right? And he was saying all kinds of profanities and basically calling me every name in the book to try to get a rise out of me. And what I said to myself, what do I want my kids to hear me say? And I just kept telling the guy that God loves him so much.
Mm.
And so it's like, it's in those moments where, well, that was different because the rise wasn't out of my children, but it was a tense situation. And I'm like, cool, how do I handle myself where I want my kids to handle themselves in the future? But I feel it's such a loss when either of my kids are just in such despair and I see them and I'm like, oh, fuck. Like, I don't want to fix them. I don't want to just like honestly, I don't want to just take it away because I know I call that coddling. Like I see a lot of parents coddle their kids and then they don't learn shit. It's the same cycle. So I try to think like, how can I, you know, just get them centered? And then I try to explain after the fact of like, the shit's gonna happen. It's how we get back to our like homeostasis, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Our grounding, our center. Yeah. Well, it sounds like there are probably certain fires that we're good at putting out, but other fires that feel a little more unfamiliar, or we haven't quite learned yet how to. Is it even a fire? Like, what is it? Um, when you see Patrick in distress, certain helplessness that comes with it.
Would you care to give a brief intro on yourself for anyone who might be curious?
Sure. I'm Darren, and I've been in Ohio for about 2.5 years now, and live in Worcester, and yeah, I grew up in upstate New York, in the Finger Lakes area, and uh, moved around quite a bit. I've lived a lot of different places, and I was brought here to work, and so so yeah, I'm a little closer to home. Prior to this, I was living in Oklahoma for several years, and And so that was probably more challenging, just being so far removed from everything that was kind of familiar. But now that I'm back here, it's brought me a little bit closer to where, you know, I feel a little more grounded, a little more rooted.
So I'm extremely fascinated by your work. Would you care to explain like why you got it? Like there's two aspects, right? The teaching in itself, but then the subject is such an abstract subject, and it's all like, so you were an art professor, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and like art is like, it's like beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right? So it's so fascinating to me. And like, so I know Darren from MOSHI. We're both members of organization called MOSHI. And listening to you talk is always, I'm just infatuated and can't shut my ears off if I wanted to, because, and I think it has a lot to do with that aspect. You spend a lot of your time educating people on obviously your what you do, but it's all in the eye of the beholder, which is super interesting to me. So tell me more.
What being in the eye, like beauty being in the eye of the beholder,
or art. I got this tapestry behind me, right, that I think is beautiful. But I would say if I have one of my uncles come in here or something, they'd be like, "What the fuck is this shit?" Like they got like a nice farm field and a tractor painting or something in their house. You know what I mean? Which is equally, they're both valid in their own right. But it's just that's kind of what I mean. Like art is so subjective might be the right word. I'm not.
Or even what do we think of as being art? I think that's the, that's the thing where we bring our own sort of assumptions and experience of perhaps the way art was presented to us when we were growing up, and the way we kind of learned to engage with art in museums and galleries, and as a viewer, as an observer. And I think I kind of always had the sense that art was something more experiential, something deeper than that. And I think that's what led me on my path towards wanting to be able to have conversations every day about it, because there's so much to it that felt as though it was not necessarily talked about or understood in the way that I was experiencing it. So I guess that's where, just yesterday I was having this conversation in the classroom. It's a digital fabrication and sculpture class. And, students are making some cool stuff, and we're talking about the ideas and what they're thinking about that goes into them. And it's very quickly that these conversations move away from, the formal aspects, or like what the object is made of, what it looks like, and it starts to move towards what it's doing. And this is usually this is where it starts to kind of move outside of this realm of like the objectness of an artwork, like, because that's typically how we're introduced to art. We go to a museum, we look at the thing, we look at the picture, that's our art. That's how we think of art. But if you spend time with art and you start to, and this is where you can kind of see, what art endures, what art remains. It's that art that draws us to it and kind of holds us there. And that's because it's doing something. And there's a verb there. It's no longer just an object. It's no longer just an image. It's doing something. And that's where things get interesting. It's like, what is it doing? And you start to track it, and you start to pay attention, and you start to listen, and you realize that this thing has a sort of essence, right? It has, and in that sense, it gives you a sense. right? This word is kind of like loaded, but it has a feeling. Um, Jung would call that a feeling tone, right? It
Mhm.
has a feeling, and this is where um, developing, this is part of I think the um, expansion of our vocabulary and expansion of our perception of what art is, because we then have to try to articulate and communicate what that feeling is. And that requires us to kind of look inward and kind of draw something out that's going to hopefully connect. Maybe, hopefully the words I'm using are going to correspond to your understanding of those words, right? At a very base level. But if I'm actively doing this, if I'm actively talking about an experience I'm having, I'm going to be able to look at you and see if like you're completely glazing over, or if, like, what I'm saying is registering. And if I just stay in that, you'll get a sense of what I'm saying. It may not line up exactly, but all of this starts to revolve around what we're looking at, right? Around the art object. And that's where, for me, the having something to like look at together is a ground. It's very grounding. It's a way in which we can kind of all agree, what are we looking at? Like we're looking at a glass with water in it, that half empty, half full, not sure, you know?
I'll pause you for 1 second. This is super hit me so hard. I was incarcerated at this rehab center one time. We were watching a video, and it was a dad and a son talking, and the son said, "Dad, you always have a way of seeing the glass half full." And he said, "Regardless, son, it's a beautiful glass."
Yeah,
And that shit just hit me so deep
yeah,
because, yeah, so true that is. It's all about perspective. I like how you made the point that it's really hard to totally 100% convey a message to someone.
mm,
It gets so lost in translation, and we all have different meanings and interpretations of certain words that we automatically assume the other person is trying to say that when that might not be the case. But that mindfulness you talked about of being present and observing the person, how receptive they are. It's yeah, it's such just beautiful points I think you're making that need to be heard for sure.
yeah. I find it's easy to get lost in these conversations because words become abstract, and if you're not using words that you know help orient us to this reality, using objects or a story or something that helps, a situation that helps kind of give us an image in our head, or gives us something in the world to kind of look at together, then they just become ideas that are kind of very nebulous and very swirling, and you know and I think that's also like one of the reasons why artists have such a hard time talking about their work and talking about using words in general. That's one of the most challenging things for artists. If you've ever talked to one, is that it seems like their head's in the clouds, and it's because
Mhm.
that's pretty much the case. Your inner life is more real than this world in a sense. And that's just kind of I think the way in which um, yeah, I think it's just how some people operate, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting because I think like obviously we do. It was a big revelation for me to learn that we live in a perspective reality. Like what how people perceive the world is absolutely 100% true for them, and it's not wrong. Um, but yeah, it's so I don't know. like there's been, I remember when I was young, messing around on the computer, and I found like this image of like a beautiful tree, and it was very psychedelic, and it was one of the most coolest things I ever saw. And and I think my higher power leaves little hints for me. Later on, I found an album. It was the album cover to an album, but it was years later that I found the music. It was Yamaya, who I really like, and it's very spiritually minded music. And but yeah, I pay attention. Why is this grabbing me? Like nowadays I see something and I'll dive right into it. Like if something, it's like a beacon. I feel like if I resonate so deep with a piece of art, I need to know more. I need to understand what this is telling me. Or it's like a little clue to the next unlocking of my development in a way, I feel.
Yeah, when something speaks to you, when a work speaks to you, it's holding your attention, and it's like it has it's like a riddle, right? It's telling you something you don't quite understand, but you know that it's important,
Absolutely.
And even if it's something that's just beautiful, like if it's just at surface level, it draws your attention, you can't stop looking at it, and you're not thinking about a damn thing. There's something true about that. There's something very kind of primal, something very real about that. And that's part of our visual experience. You can do that. Can be the same with music. It can be the same with words. We have. I think that's one of the things we become addicted to is our own words, the words that are circulating in our own heads. That keep coming back to us over and over again. That part of that's our programming, and it's sorting through what those messages are. Like, which ones do you keep? Which ones do you pay attention to? When do you not pay any attention to it? Like those voices,
When you create, what is your preferred medium of art?
Yeah, I don't have a medium of choice per se, but I like to think of space as my medium. So when I'm thinking about creating, I'm usually thinking about my experience in space and a particular space usually, or usually there's some kind of prompt or some kind of opportunity that I've been given to create something. And so, yeah, I guess I tend to think about the way that the things that I make can function as like instruments or tools to help communicate. And so, yeah, it kind of depends, I guess, but not material specific for sure. Yeah.
Do you have like a set systematic ritual or anything that you do to help get you in that flow state of creating?
I mean, I guess it depends on whether, what the situation is for creating. There are times I'll just have a pen in my hand and paper in front of me, and I'll just go. I don't plan. I just kind of intuitively, the moment the pen hits the paper, just starts going, and my job is just to listen. I'm just kind of, it's like entering the flow. Like it's a stream of consciousness and just unfolds. And those feel like the most open and the most fluid times of just sort of operating from some sort of creative wellspring, I guess. You're engaged directly with it. But the art that I guess that I'm usually engaged with is more project focused, and it usually involves a space or a situation in which I'm trying to bring together a whole lot of either people or experiences into a space, and so it's kind of like the space becomes the workspace itself, and so I'll create sculptural objects and instruments and things, but they're all kind of seen as, I see them as things that to be used, to be handled, to be, they function in a way. And so very much in that mode, I guess I feel like I'm more of a designer, so.
I like that a lot because it's not so yes, it's not rigid in the form. It's the space creates the form,
Mm-hmm.
different
Mm-hmm.
perspectives are added and different things, and you're able to interact and weave the personalities into the art form as you guys create.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's super key. Because I've been in situations or meeting formats where it is very rigid and it disconnects people, so yes, getting people engaged and focused is the goal, I would say, right? And interactive with whatever you're doing.
Yeah, I'd say when it's been effective, it's been a way of shaping space that kind of creates a space for something to happen, or it kind of sets a stage for an experience,
And I think you actually getting this podcast going. I've talked to you a little bit before, and I think you had mentioned to me yeah, it's set the space up and it'll happen,
Yeah.
And that actually helped me out a lot because it was in my own mind, I can get I guess it's a form of perfectionism in a way. I stall out even doing things because I don't know how it's going to go, or some of that jargony bullshit that goes on in my head, when in reality, since I've done this, that's all I've done. I've just created the space and I basically wing it. It's just a conversation, and it's I think of it as an art form in its own right from my perspective, and it's just and it's been beautiful and so much fun so far. So I do appreciate that.
Yeah. What do you when you're preparing? What do you think of? What are you thinking of, and what are you doing as you prepare?
It's interesting because I try not to. I actively try to disengage from the dialogue that I have some general curiosities of things I would like to explore with any one person, but other than that, I pretty much just jump into it because I feel like I'm the best when it's I was just talking to Melanie this morning about that because I've been told I should start hosting events, donation-based events where I talk.
Mm-hmm.
And just me talking. And I'm like, it seems so yeah, you give me a microphone, I could probably go on, but I have a lot of blockage when it comes to preparing a subject or preparing things like that. So instead of, I guess, right, I guess this is making me think of that's something that I need to lean into because it's a very effective method to convey an idea. But I've always just, I guess, I just jump right in and see where it goes. And I've noticed a lot in a lot of conversations, I do feel like I wish I was kind of more prepared because even though it's a half a second on here in my brain, I feel like things are stalling out and I need to keep it engaged. So it's I don't know. It's a play of both worlds. I tend to lean more into the wing it aspect, but I'm learning that I need to be a little more cohesive in a direction. I think it might be a little more efficient and more engaging to the masses if I do it that way.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're good when you jump into it. Like you're in the soup and you're kind of just, you're immersed, right, in your experience, and you're good from there. You're able to operate really well from there, from what I can tell. You know, you're in your own being and in your own body, but that also, I think what allows you to do that is you're very open and you just kind of accept whatever is and you don't worry about it. But to be operating with more direction and to feel as though you have a little more control about perhaps where you're going means you have to have some sort of like map, right?
Mm.
You have to at least have an understanding of, for some perspective on like where you would like things to directly, and where you'd like it to kind of go towards. And but maybe that's what you're saying stresses you out. You know, it's having to think too much about that.
Yeah, I would say that's
finding a balance.
Mm-hmm. So it's beautiful to have a community and a beautiful girlfriend who is very good at things I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm super curious. Like, I feel like some humans are born with, I've heard it called like a a spiritual immune system, almost like a rejection to false, maybe not false, but just not a immediate jumping on the belief bandwagon of certain things. And I feel like we both kind of share that spiritual immune system. And I'm curious on your perspective or the way that you would communicate that to someone.
Yeah, you brought up the word belief a couple weeks ago, and that's a word that's always been sort of one of those words that feels so charged for me because it was such a big part of my upbringing. Growing up, my parents were fundamental Christians, so you know, going to church 3 times a week, and you know, having a particular way of viewing the world kind of shoved down your throat from a biblical perspective and from a dogmatic perspective, and and yeah, I think you hit a certain age, and if you're thinking and you're paying attention, you start to see that these words, these ideas, that immune system is sort of a skepticism, right? It's like, or what are we talking? Are we sure about what we're saying here, or are we just kind of mindlessly following belief? You know, the belief word, there it is. The belief word is like, if I believe in something, I don't have to think about it. I don't have to really kind of consider it. It's just something that I believe. And I think that that's sort of counter to experience in a sense. If I have an experience, I don't need to believe. There's no belief involved because the belief is something you put your hope into. It's something that you kind of it's a theory. It's like, in theory, you know, I believe that the moon is made of cheese, right? But you know, maybe I go to the moon and wow, it tastes pretty good. You know, this actually is, I don't need to believe that it's made of cheese. I know it's made of cheese, you know? And so I think that we're, you know, growing up, you're given a lot of beliefs, things that perhaps are given to you as truth for other people, but that's your culture. And, you know, our job is to kind of, as human beings, I think, is to kind of not just assume and not just believe, but to actually experience and to, you know, question what it is we're being told and talk about it and explore the ideas that we're just kind of operating with these assumptions. And that's why I think that, you know, artists and being creative and imagining, these are all ways of operating in which you're taking the information and you're transforming it and you're generating something new out of it. So you're actually taking what take what you've been given, but you have to put it, you have to ingest it in a sense, and then regurgitate it back up through your own experience, through your own body.
Mm-hmm.
And so every time we do that, we're giving form through ourselves, we're creating. And so that's kind of, you can think of someone handing you a broken chair and saying, okay, well, what are you going to do with the broken chair? Well, you're supposed to fix it. I'm like, okay, are we? So it's just going to be a chair again? I've already got a chair. Maybe I don't need another chair. Well, then maybe we can make something else with it. And then you realize you have some materials in your hand. You can make anything you want as long as you know how to work with the materials. So that's where it comes down to, for me, art comes down to your own personal sort of, what do you want? What do you imagine? What is it that what are you trying to do? And that's a creative process. That's something that we have to kind of really, well, maybe just intuitively follow. Just kind of just tap in and like start making. And I think that's the best way usually. That'll tell you what you're really thinking. That'll tell you what's really on your mind if you get out of your own way and just start making.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a difference between believing and knowing, for sure.
Mm.
And I've noticed in my own life, it's like, I love how you said, like, you gotta get down and search at what you really want, right? Because I can let myself get bogged down by the day-to-day mundane bills, work, things like that, and not sit with myself and give myself enough time to really focus and hone in on what I want. But that, I believe, that's all it really takes to break that cycle and live a passionate, fulfilled life, is doing what you want. You said, like, getting out of your way and just creating or just making.
Mm-hmm.
And that really hit me, because it's like, I guess I can get in my own way more than I like to admit. It's like those daily practices I do help me. It always falls back for me on these daily practices to get out. And that's what it is. It's getting out of my own way and moving intuitively.
I think that the daily practices, I mean, maybe if we're talking about the same kind of daily practice, is sort of a meditation, right? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, it can be in many different forms, but yeah, whatever one feels is good for them. For mine, it is meditation and yoga and exercise, a little bit of reading, different things to kind of, like, I guess I've been diagnosed with ADHD, whatever the fuck that means, but I do feel like I think about a lot of different things all the time. I'm not like, and I've heard it said that geniuses, the only difference is their ability to focus. Okay. So I can focus on a lot of things, which has served me well in a lot of areas of my life. But when I really want to hone in and achieve something, I have to, these daily practices help me, like, narrow my focus, so to speak. So I'm not all over the place, and I can just kind of dive in a certain subject or a certain activity and just give it my all, which is not the easiest thing for me.
Yeah. Well, I think the getting out of your own way part, that's what the meditation and daily practice does, right? Is it creates a clearing, right? Get all the distractions out of the way, open up it's very spatial for me anyhow, where it just opens things up and you become aware. And if you're able to, the best, when it's working best, you're really just becoming aware of everything,
Mm.
your own experience, but your own experience radiates outward into the space around you. And all of that's very much just a sort of presence, right? And that presence is sort of just holding space for you. Now, the thing we're talking about, getting out of your own, like this is all setting the stage. This is all priming the pump. This is all just kind of creating a clearing. It's like gessoing a canvas, you know? It's like extracting the block from the mountain so that you can begin. You haven't done anything.
Ah.
You've only prepared. So this is where, okay, good. Now you have the distractions out of the way. Now that your mind is not flitting all over the place, what is it that flits into you? What is it that kind of moves you forward and into the world? And what is it that you do without thinking about it? You know, perhaps that's where the real, you know, the mind and the body register into a sort of performative mode, you could say. You know, it activates. I mean, that could be simply just jumping in your car and driving because you're compelled to. You know, I was inspired. Well, usually you're inspired. The spirit enters you to do something, and that doesn't always make a lot of sense. It's not always rational. It's rarely rational. It's you know, and I think, you know, you learn by practicing that, the discipline of practicing that, getting out of your own way, setting the stage and going, is learning which tools you gravitate towards, which materials kind of in your hand feel like they can speak for me, or they feel like, you know, maybe it's a sledgehammer in the wall in front of me. Hey, power to you. If you know, if the repercussions of that are not going to come falling down on your head, you know, then that may be what you need to speak at this moment, you know. And I think that the practice of that, first giving yourself permission to get out of your own way and then move forward, you can then kind of begin to really listen and pay attention and realize that even the smallest move forward can be charged with a potential of creative possibility. Like, it may just be a simple pushing some dirt with my finger to inscribe a shape in the ground in front of me. Why? I don't know. But maybe you do it first and then we'll talk about it. Or you do it first and then we can pay witness to it, just observe it, acknowledge that that's a thing, and say, huh, what was that? And I mean, the nice thing about that pure gesture, just as a pure gesture of the finger dragged through the dirt in front of you, it's scalable. It can continue. It can flourish. It can propagate into a field of gestures of fingers in the sand or the dirt until, you know, you've seen these TikTok videos and these YouTube videos of people who are just doing things ad nauseum, you know, over and over and over again until it becomes, I mean, it's a meme in a sense, right? It's a repetitive act that that the creative spirit is entered and allowed a space to unfold, and all of a sudden you put a camera on that and it's a thing. You know, this could be, you know, ice carving, ice skating, ice climbing, you know, I don't know. And why ice? I'm not sure. Perhaps it's ephemeral. Perhaps because ice is, you know, it's there temporarily. So there's a sense of time and urgency, you know? And I think that's the thing. You said you're good with your back up against the wall.
Right.
Because there's a sense of urgency. You don't have time to think about it and you just go. Same with putting out a fire. The fire's going to burn everything down unless you do something now. And that doesn't require you to think. It requires you to be present and super aware of what you're able to do in that moment with the tools and resources you have available to you. And maybe it's just your body. Who knows? But I think that's where you start to focus all the problems and fires you've been putting out around you, all the social situations and issues that perhaps have been drawing your attention because maybe they've needed your attention. But if you have a spiritual practice, a meditative practice, you start to look inward and you start to pay attention to perhaps the fires inside, perhaps the urgency inside, and what compels you to do something. Because something inside is telling you to.
Yeah, you're very good at speaking and using real life metaphors to convey messages.
That's good to hear, because I don't often feel that way.
No, it's beautiful. It makes so much sense. And yeah, and it makes me think of this Terence McKenna quote I heard. It was like, the psychedelic community should not consume content, they should create. Right. And it's, yeah. And that really helped me start my journey of my videos that I do. Yeah. And it's like, it kind of hit me because it's like, I've lived a lot of my life still cleaning the canvas, so to speak, you know? And so it's a beautiful time. And I think for not just me, but other people as well. The energy is just shifting around so much that it's accelerating the canvas clearing process for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that's right, you know, because I think we imagine that canvas, that clean blank slate, as like our moment to announce or pronounce what it is that we are going to say, right? What we're going to show, what form we're going to give to whatever our soul is speaking, right? But it's a lot of pressure. Right? That's why most people are just like, shit, I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. And so what I would urge is that perhaps you let that canvas, that big gesture, that big space that you imagine, because it's so profound, to simmer and set until the spirit strikes. But in the meantime, what are you going to do? Well, in the meantime, maybe you scale it down. You have a small piece of paper that functions as your model, right? It becomes a space where you can play and you can explore what it is that you're trying to say. You know, rather than writing the novel, perhaps you write a poetic phrase. Rather than writing the opus magnus, you know, you write a little melody, you know, rather than putting together the, you know, total work of art. You kind of just get your thoughts onto a page. You get your thought. I mean, this is the daily practice of just staying tuned in with that process of going in and extracting out before you really have to kind of go big, you know, or you have the opportunity to. If you have the opportunity to, then you should be grateful. But, you know, to begin just by taking a look in, drawing it out and saying, you know, what is it? First of all, just questioning, I think, you know, just looking at it, observing it, acknowledging it, accepting it. That's the hardest part, because most of the time you put something out there and you're like, what did I just do? That's awful. You know, you critique and then you analyze and you say, I'm never doing that again. But that's kind of the cool part, is that right there is a perfect example of why we have such a hard time being with ourselves. Is because it's hard to look at yourself sometimes, and especially when you draw something out from inside, and just accepting it to begin with. You have to just accept it. And
it's interesting. Like the most, like I like how, like, because I can do the critiquing a lot too. Like I've put out videos that I think are absolutely horrible, And then from the outside perspective, they're the most interactive with the community. Like the ones I don't like the most, everyone else likes the best, which I find super perplexing, you know?
My guess is because they're the most authentic, but that authentic side of you is probably a little cringy. It usually is. It's like, oh my God, that was not my best side, because you have a perception of your best side. You have a perception of what you want to present.
Have you found that true in your own creations as well?
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's why I feel like the most successful ones have been the most brutally authentic.
And it makes total sense, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I listened to this study where they put people into a Faraday cage and they measured the vibrations that they were emitting. And they brought them through every range of emotion. And the highest vibrating emotion, if you want to call authenticity an emotion, was authenticity. Like them just being real as fuck is where humans vibrate the most, you know.
I bet that's got to be a high vibration, right?
The highest, they say.
The highest.
Higher than
off the charts.
Yeah. And that's part of that's the joy of the human experience, I think. Because I think I got caught in the trap for a long time of like, I want to be joyful. I want to be happy. I want to be, feeling good all the time. But that's not the human experience, That's not, it's getting in touch with yourself and in tune and operating on how you are in that moment. And that's what it's about.
Yeah, wanting to feel good all the time, that'll lead you right to the dopamine trigger every time.
Yeah.
And whatever it takes to trip it, And Lord knows, if we're creative, we got lots of ways to trip the dopamine, and they're not all good.
Yeah. Oh, that's absolutely accurate in my own experience. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, when you make it what we're talking about in the practice of making a space to just pay attention, to become aware, to acknowledge, that'll lead you to some pretty dark spaces. It'll lead you to things that you don't want to look at. And I think, it takes a lot to, and I think, just the conversations we've been having over the past few months, this becomes this very seasonal ebb and flow and cycle of like feeling all right this week to I'm up against it. Like there's something dark that I'm definitely facing and confronting. And I think it's really nice to have that community to just acknowledge that, yeah, we're all doing this. And so it's okay. First of all, it's okay that you have this, perhaps when I go inside, or perhaps just my being is experiencing something really heavy, really dark. The first thing you need to do is not run away from it and push it away, right? But accept it. Mm-hmm. And accept that, like, okay, all right, this is what I got, at least right now. And maybe this is my opportunity. This is my calling. This is my moment of, putting my feet in the fire and saying, am I going to go in? And then if you go in, perhaps having somebody there next to you, or perhaps having community, that's where it feels as though you have a support network in case things go sideways, And this reminds me of like, it can be very scary doing that work. And I think there's lots of tools we can use to do that, including the people around us, including alternative medicines and things like this, where our ego's doing its best to protect us. It's doing its best to preserve what it knows to be true, The problem is what the ego knows to be true. Yeah, it's questionable. It's very, very questionable because it probably doesn't know 90% of what it thinks it does. Same with our culture, you know.
You made the point earlier when you were talking about religion, like to think about things and be able to communicate them, you know, and talk about them and dissect them, play with them, right? And yeah, I cannot stress the beauty enough of having a community where no subject is taboo, right? Because I grew up, my upbringing was that certain things were taboo. They weren't even talked about. You weren't even allowed to question them, you know? And you can't grow that way. It just doesn't work. And like, and it's been a, like a, I don't know, 27-year journey of mine to actually find humans where I can interact with them without fear of communicating whatever random ass shit pops in my head, which is, it can be quite even strange to me at times, you know. And so yeah, I just can't stress that enough. It is like the more I've always been very like I'm learning how to give other people the reins, so to speak, you know, what give them some control of my life. Not necessarily control my life, but like let them help me. Right? It's like hard for me to accept help. I'm more than willing to help someone, but that's what where I'm at in my spiritual path. It is. It's all about that community and allowing people in and being more vulnerable. I thought I was a very open and vulnerable person, you know, and I am in a lot of aspects, but there's a lot of shit that I'm like, I'm keeping that for myself still, you know, like no way in hell am I giving you control of that. A practice that was suggested to me that I've been doing, that I was asked, do you ever actually ride in the passenger seat of someone's vehicle? And the answer was no. I'm always in the driver's seat, you know. Um, and so I've been actively practicing just sitting in the passenger side and enjoying a physical ride somewhere. And it's interesting how difficult that is, how much I want to kick the person out of the driver's seat. And because yeah, it's getting out of my comfort zone. I'm safe when I'm in control because I can manipulate whatever's going on to make sure that I don't get hurt, right? And giving that control up to someone, it's it's wild how resistant I am.
So giving it, I think there's, you say giving it up to someone, but I just also wonder if it's a something.
I would say, yeah, you're hitting on something that's real for sure. Um, yeah, so it's like weird because like I've always felt like I know when my higher power is communicating with me, right? But I also feel like I've been very stubborn. Like I know, like I've been told by some of the members of MOSHI that we can't tell you shit because you already have all the answers. Like you really do. Like you know, but like you don't use it, you know? And that's true because there's always an like I always want to be the devil's advocate. I always want to poke and poke until it smacks me in the face to like I was told like it doesn't have to hurt. Like it can be fun and easy. Like why do you want it to hurt all the time? Like in order to hear what I'm the message, like I wait for it to smack me when I know I can get out ahead of it and not have to do all the bullshit. But I still am. I'm just not there. I'm poking along the way.
Well, I mean, let's just appreciate the fact that maybe there's some rationale or reason to that, like to feel it, right? I poke and prod because I want a reaction, because I want to feel. Same reason Patrick's doing it. You know, I want to feel this. I want to know that it's real. I want to experience it. And yeah, maybe perhaps there's a spectrum of that. Like, yeah, you don't need to, poking and prodding can lead to punching and screaming, but you know, there's a playfulness, I would say. There's play is, I mean, you know, we're physical forms in this world, and we're stupid apes that just try and drop from the trees, and like we have evolved this amazing sort of ability to create technologies that allow us to kind of, or tap into something that allows us to kind of have an imagination and envision and tap into some sort of consciousness that is available to us. But to really kind of understand what that is or how this world relates to that, you got to do a lot of poking and prodding. I think you have to play with it. I think it's how we play with the world to see what opens up to us, and to feel it, not just to in theory understand it. It's something you need to kind of experience. And like, I mean, I love the way how playful you are, and I love the sort of very, I mean, archetypically trickstery. You know, it's like it's not all that harmless. It's a little bit threatening because like you're not afraid. You know, I might poke you in some dark spaces. I might slap your ass. You know what I mean? Like, and to get a response, but also because I'm hitting where I need to. Like I'm flipping the trigger. I'm like, you know, mind you, this is all pretty harmless. Like you're very harmless, I would say. But it can be very threatening because culturally, you know, taboo, right? These are things we do not do, you know? But I mean, who says, you know?
Yeah.
And like every good comedian, you're going to poke and prod in those spaces that are a little uncomfortable. There's a function to that, culturally necessary. You have to do that. And we don't maybe like it at the time. Maybe it doesn't feel good when someone's poking and prodding at our dark bits and pieces, but it's bringing awareness where awareness is needed. And that's so essential. And I mean, you talk about ADHD I mean, this is just something that like, we're just maybe, you know, part of it's being modern, part of it's the fact that there's too much information around us, but the other part of it's very biological and evolutionary in the sense that like our attention goes to wherever it needs to. And our job is to sort of weed through the bullshit and figure out where our attention is best spent. And so the fact that you impulsively, physically make an experience out of the thing where your attention is going, I think makes total sense. It's like, and it's funny, it cracks me up.
Yeah.
It's entertaining, you know?
No, I agree 100%. And I definitely, I know we talked before, but I appreciate your perspective of me because I do, and I think it's accurate. It's like a fine line. Like I also view them as like survival mechanisms, right? Like certain traits we pick up are survival mechanisms, but as life goes on, we don't necessarily need to use them in the same way we once did because there's no longer a threat, right? So it's finding that line of like, when this is fucking awesome and it serves me beautifully, but now it's time to release it. And yeah, that's like the part of the game of life, so to speak, is like, yeah, like when do I know when because I can egg on a little bit too much too, to a certain extent. But then it's also like I always say, some people respond well to aggression. Like some people that's where they're at, you know? And it's like, and I have so much fun just interacting and talking and poking. And, you know, sometimes I don't say anything.
Yeah, no, I think you've got, you know, a lot of different sides of yourself that you do make very sort of parent, you know? And I think that, yeah, what you're saying is that perhaps in the past, this poking and prodding is a defense also, right? It's keeping people out of your personal space. Like, don't fucking get close to me or you're going to get poked.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Like, I think that that's kind of, that's a function also of like, this is my boundary. And this is where I feel comfortable. Like I'm preserving a part of myself. So I think the balance is, right, if you're willing to poke and prod, then you have to kind of open yourself up. Like if you're gonna do this, then you need to surrender it all. And that's maybe it's just basically taking that very fine line in that poke and prod as a defense and pushing it out, opening up that space of play. So it becomes this larger arena of play where you can maybe perhaps also feel as though you are open to whatever that exposes in you, but also it just creates a space where others feel like they can enter also and start to explore those things, because perhaps that's what it's doing, is it's actively creating that space where now all of a sudden I don't feel so uncomfortable smacking you in the ass, you know? And that helps me. So there's some sort of like social function in this.
I've also I just thought about this. Is like, I do it in a way too that like I appreciate the ones that poke back. Like I think I look for an emotional trigger, and if I find it, that tells me how safe I am with that person of some sorts. And then when they poke back and find it entertaining and are able to have that dialogue, I in turn can open up more to that person. Because so that's super cool. Like Steve, who I had on the podcast last week, and obviously, you know, like we can banter back and forth all day, you know, but it's very safe, but we're poking at the darkest things we can see, you know. And I think me and you also have like this, I don't know if it's equal, but a higher level of skepticism than I see from the others in our little community.
I think we have a very sensitive bullshit meter.
Yeah,
I get that sense with you anyhow.
for sure.
I'm hyper skeptical. Yeah. What's that?
I said, yeah, I would like to think so, at least, that I have that bullshit meter for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I think what you're talking about again is these are tests of authenticity. Like, how real are we being right now? Right now, how real are we being?
Yeah, you hit it on the head with that one for sure.
And that's a active testing of the boundaries, active testing of is this real? Is what we're doing right now, like, are you giving it to me straight? Because if you're not, then I don't know if I have much interest in doing this. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
absolutely. Don't waste my time. Yeah.
Don't waste my time.
I'm curious.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you.
I was just going to say, it's often the case where, you know, if there is a lot of, I mean, and I've sat in a lot of corporate boardrooms, and I've sat in a lot of like business meetings and sales pitches, and, you know, lots of environments you can walk into, and it's just like you can cut the bullshit with a knife, you know? Mm-hmm. And I have very little to say. Like, I'm just going to listen, and it's about that clearing of space again. It's like, I want there to be a space for something real to enter, like for something more authentic to kind of present itself, I guess. But you were going to say?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I was curious if there's any philosophy of life, religion, whatever, however you want to word it, that that you're drawn to the most? Like I'll take a little bit from everything that I've encountered. I've not encountered them all yet, but
yeah. I mean, I think I go through a lot of different, what would you say, thoughts and ideas and theories and readings and writings from everywhere. And, it's ranged from Jung and Joseph Campbell to Foucault and Derrida to McKenna and Watts. And, and right now, and I kind of have gone through, there's been a lot of it that I've just after being immersed in it, you kind of start to realize, well, that's not all true, or not all of this is stuff that I need to take with me. So it's sort of like picking what you need to, and taking that with you. And for me lately, it's been very much ancient teachings. Know thyself. I'm terrible at reciting and quoting, but I love reading. The more I read from like the Tao, and things like this, but also in a more contemporary lens, it's been McKenna, just because he's so rich with language, and he's articulating something about our experience of space that really resonates with me. In my experience, that's become multidimensional, more accessible, I'd say, in figuring out how this world and this life is only one sliver of other realities and other dimensions that perhaps I've been toying with through art and through imagination and creative process. But there's lots of ways, I think, to explore those things. So philosophically, I guess it's always been leading towards people who are Mircea Eliade. There's these thinkers that are looking at things holistically. So even scientists, that are Rupert Sheldrake, scientists that are or Alfred North Whitehead, process philosophy. These are scientists who challenge the scientific community. They're looking at the things that still remain unknown, but they're also open to perhaps more mystical experiences. I think Jung was here. That's why him and Freud fell out, because Jung was much more of a mystic. Understood alchemy, understood proto-science was closer to perhaps of the alchemists is closer to where it was more inclusive of these internal processes that are invisible and unseen, but are also kind of resonant with what our experience is when we go to the other realms, through psychedelic experience or through some transcendent experience that you can get to. Ancient cultures or tribal cultures and communities have been doing throughout human evolution, through physical tests and through hallucinogenics or whatever. There's been lots of ways in which we try to put the body through the ringer in order to kind of have an experience that kind of awakens us to the fact that this reality is, pretty elusive, pretty illusory, we would say, I guess, right?
Very pliable as well.
Yeah. It
was
like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of names you've mentioned that I actually am not familiar with, so it's exciting for me to know that there's so much more to learn. But yeah, it was Terrence McKenna was huge for me, and like on my journey, one of like psychedelics have been a huge healing part of my journey, and it was Terrence McKenna that said, "Yeah, take 5 grams alone in the dark, and then then we can have a conversation, right?" Basically, and I was like, "What the fuck?" And in doing that, I yes, it made me realize that there's a lot, as the Bible puts it, there's many rooms in my Father's mansion, right? There's many different realities or dimensions of life that exist that I used to think was hokey bullshit. And yeah, now it's part of my practice to try to perceive things that are unperceivable on a normal basis. It's super fun, and learning
Yeah,
is
I like that.
yeah.
Well, I like that you use that metaphor of your father's mansion because, that's our culture, right? It's this structure that's been built for us. But and
Mhm.
and I think we should definitely, in the future, start to wander into the basement a bit and start to go through some of the old scrawlings and writings and literature um, that expose us to some of the more um, marginal thoughts and ideas and experiences that remain sort of in perhaps the poetic depths of our culture. They don't make their way to the light of day because they're a little too eclectic or obscure, or I don't know what that means, therefore what am I going to use it for? There's a lot of philosophy around the turn of the century, and a lot of artists that were working who, in the light of industrial revolution and scientific thinking and empirical process of like, well, we've got it all figured out and we're well on our way to like conquering the world. There are plenty of people who were saying, hold up, let's slow down this machine, let's slow down the ship, and let's take a look at, all of humanity we've left behind, and said that we don't need all that magical thinking anymore, all that esoteric thought anymore, all these rituals and ceremony. We don't need that shit anymore because we're real now. Well, just because you've built, a convincing stage set and a glorious mansion doesn't mean that it isn't still rife with ghosts and spirits and potential for accessing other dimensions, because there's portals that open up, into other realms. And you just thought that you didn't need those anymore, but those were the magical keys to the universe that Pythagoras was playing with, and that, the Robert Flood creating illustrations that, laid out the cosmos through geometries and through Pythagoras's music of the spheres. I mean, this stuff is not only fascinating, so true. I mean, you have a psychedelic experience and you get it. You're like, oh, holy synesthesia, holy senses galore. Like, this is not reality anymore, and it's more true than any reality we have. So why aren't we talking about that? you know
And the beautiful thing
and
is,
I think that's what.
I said the beautiful thing is there is a lot of conversations happening about it all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
I actually met someone with synesthesia a couple weeks ago, and we just had
Okay.
a fascinating conversation because yeah, I feel like I have experienced some of that under higher states of consciousness with psychedelics, but what like and that just goes to show you the power of humans in general. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we're all beautifully unique and similar in so many ways, but yeah, I like to say we're all our unique pattern recognition devices. We all recognize the reality and the pattern, how our upbringing, our past lives, whatever it may be, our culture, our personal preferences. We all build a specific, and we see different patterns. And it's so beautiful. I like to say in the way, like I've done construction the majority of my life. So if when I walk up to someone's house, I can tell if their shingles are fucked up or their concrete's uneven or, different little things. That's what I automatically see, when other people don't, they would never notice it. And it's just because of my repetition of time, I learned to hone my focus to that. But a belief is a thought you just keep thinking too. So it's like over repetition of time, I can pick any pattern. That's a beautiful thing about being a human too, is I can deliberately design my pattern recognition device to see whatever patterns I want. And something I've been working on over the past couple months is like my auto tuner always goes to the most aggressive person in the room. I know who's upset. I know, whether it be like feeling sad or angry or but it's like I've been praying in my prayers, like I want to see the best shit going on. I want to see the happiest person. I want to see the blessings, And I think part of it is because I have the ability to lift spirits in a way. So I'm kind of drawn to people who are a little bit lower. That way I can get them up to speed, so to speak. But I can have that job if I want it. I think I don't have to subscribe to that either.
Well, yeah, and having an awareness means clearly, you had to in the past be aware of the danger. So, the cracks in the sidewalks, the falling shingles, and the angry person in the room are all just warning signs of like, what kind of space am I in and what do I have to be aware of? And yeah, you could go in there and you could start to patch shit up. You could start to address all of that. But it sounds like you're also more interested in like, you know what? maybe I'm not so interested in being the fix-it guy anymore. Maybe I'd like to kind of move into a new space where I'm recognizing the higher frequency, maybe the beauty of things, maybe the brighter spirits, maybe the paintings on the wall even, because the house and the structure has been cared for, so that I can level up in your terms, right? Like the game, you're gaming, and now you're gaming towards the gems rather than just running from the creatures. You're gaming towards what's going to get you that next level. And yeah, I think we're all going to always have to contend with both, but again, it's where your attention going. And maybe those little clues are also insights into what is your next move. Where are you going to start to create the gems, or perhaps, how do you create, what are you creating that is actually going to help those around you also? So you can help others, but maybe helping pull people up out of the muck is one thing, but then also, and it'd be good if everyone was covered here, right? Pull them up out of the muck, but you can also then, give someone a good boost so that their wings can kind of expand open and they can go soar, It's like,
Absolutely.
it'd be nice if we could help everybody.
So what's Darren's pattern recognition?
I think I am. I helplessly see the best in everybody, and I see the potential for whatever their abilities are, I guess. So if I could put it in concrete terms, we were talking about synesthesia, and I think of that as like a bodily sort of synthesis of senses and of abilities, right? So on a corporeal level, on a sort of individual level, that's how your organism sort of aligns itself to be able to kind of open up to experience by getting rid of oh, I'm listening now, I'm looking now, I'm feeling now, to like I'm being, right? That's kind of a more integrated and holistic expression of being in the world. So that's beautiful. I like the idea that the individual can do that, but also what would it mean to be able to do that, to scale that up a bit, or to radiate that out so that your community also can do that, so that you bring the you bring the biologist, you bring the musician, you bring the dancer, you bring the geologist, you bring the bartender in, and you all do what you do, but you do it through your own lens. You're recognizing your own patterns, you're recognizing your own abilities, but you're all doing that in orchestration together. And this is a concept of German term called, the Germans got great words for everything, Gesamtkunstwerk, which is total work of art. And this is Richard Wagner was, in the 1800s, was putting together operas that for the first time included, all the disciplines. It included, music and dance and theater, and they created structures for this to be able to present these sort of total works of art. So that's something where I love having conversations with people who have a passion or intense interest in something, and then being able to see the connection, or be able to see the patterns that they see through my own lens. And then it's funny, because if you just create a space for all of that to kind of coexist, there's a lot more correspondence and conversation than you would ever imagine. It's kind of crazy. It's a beautiful thing. When I first started having conversations with musicians and engineers, computer scientists, about their ideas, I could see that we were kind of looking at the same thing. And maybe it doesn't have the same form, but we're talking about the same thing. We're talking about space, and we're talking about the patterns that emerge in space. And so I thought it a good, sort of opportunities to bring people together, and to use sculpture to do that, to use art to do that, to create a space where people can come together and be creative together and give form to something new, some new kind of ritual or ceremony, perhaps something that allows people to elevate, level up together. Maybe that's the game analogy, is that we're all going to level up together.
Yeah.
And in my experience, those have been very beautiful moments where that's happened, where something else happens, where you're not in control, you're not orchestrating it, you're just opening it, you're just open to it. And that for me is the art experience, when it's the same thing as like going to a rave or a concert, and you kind of feel the energy in the room, and in the space. It's like being able to create that, but with new form, I think.
Yeah, I love it. It is one of the most beautiful things that I've ever witnessed, is seeing someone in their element doing their thing, whatever their thing is.
Yeah.
It's just, it's a beautiful thing to watch, and it inspires me as well.
Well, and I've mentioned to you before, I feel like when you're speaking, you're in your element. Like, you've got a way with words, you've got language, you've got like something else happens when you start speaking. I think other people recognize this as well, but yeah, just acknowledging and recognizing.
I definitely appreciate that, and Melanie will tell me the same thing. Like, everyone listens when you talk, and I still scratch my head and wonder why, but it doesn't really matter, I suppose. But yeah, Is there anything else?
Well,
that you...
and so what would you say? Well, yeah, I'm kind of curious, if we had to imagine or, think about this ability that everyone else seems to see and you're a little skeptical of, perhaps. But like, if you had to create a model or you had to create sort of a way of looking at yourself as, let's say, a speaker or an orator or someone who has messages that you're delivering, is there some kind of like, do you foresee that in a way that it can give form or you can give form to that? And I mean, you're doing it with this podcast, I think. But.
Yeah. No. So like, I guess I'm not like, yeah, I believe it. And I do see from feedback from people, it's apparent, right? I just feel underqualified. I guess it's like imposter syndrome, they call it. But I guess they say everyone successful feels that way too. So it's just like, yeah, I just feel underqualified for like, I just feel like the way I've lived my life, and then I just went basically from being like addicted to drugs to a father pretty rapidly, and that's been my life. And so it's just like, and then I see these people who seem to have, I don't want to use the word, coast by pretty smoothly in life and have acquired material things, which isn't everything, but it is a show for work that's been done, are super intrigued and listen and hold great value. And so it's like, I think I've overcome a lot of hurdles in my life, but there's still a lot more that I see other people do with ease that I have not accomplished. And so it's conflicting in myself to wonder why I pique such an interest to them when what's easy to them is still somewhat a task for me to achieve.
Are you thinking of something specific that you see other people accomplish that makes you feel underqualified?
I guess it's like our cultural's definition of success. I mean, I'm not as financially viable as I want to be. But yeah, that doesn't really like, and ultimately, I know that doesn't really mean shit. Like it's all, it's kind of just like, I mean, it's real, but it's not real in a way too. It's just a agreement that we all have on how we should run our society. Well, I wouldn't say all of us either. And I come from like, I think that a lot of the reason I am not where I want to be, I used to come from the mindset of like, this is all a game and I don't want to play this game, so I'm not going to. But now I'm in the mindset, I don't want to play this game, so I have to beat it in order to not let it hold me back anymore, and that's been a transitional mindset shift in recent years. So no, I think it's just with this community and MOSHI and me doing my podcast and my videos, like I have extremely gained the confidence. And like I used to be a very strong member of a 12-step program, and they have similar. Some of the meetings, it's like a speaker meeting, like someone gets up there and tells their story. And yeah, it just always blew me away on how, like, I see people getting sober and doing their thing and they're really successful in our terms, and they tell their story and you hear it once and no one asks them to go around and talk. But like, I have a stack of like 40 papers in a very short time of where I was in like 4 different counties, every a couple times a week telling my story, and it's just fucking mind-boggling. Like, why the fuck? Like, I'm just. And I think a part of it's that authenticity. I think I can, like you said, I get talking, and it's just real. I just say whatever the fuck comes to my mind, and I don't think about it. I don't have to. I'm not worried about what dick fuck over there thinks about it or anything. You know, I just say what I say, and I think that resonates with people on a super deep level because, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, in our culture, often or like disingenuine is rewarded. You know, and so I think I think I'm refreshing to some. In a way, I think that authenticity and me just being me.
It's funny you use that word because it's funny that's funny you use that word refreshing because I think that's the difference I observe with you is that you're not telling the same story over and over. You're not telling your story over and over. You're updating your story on the fly. You're updating your story in the present moment with each conversation. And that's much different than like sitting back and saying, this is my story and I'm sticking to it. It's like, you're not sticking to it. You haven't married yourself to it. You're staying present and updating it. And people get that as authentic. Like, oh yeah, this guy's story is happening right now. Like, I want to hear more because it's happening. And that's pretty exciting. That's pretty cool. That's like, that separates you from, I would say, perhaps what you're experiencing in rooms where people are telling their story, you know? Like,
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
anyhow, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you want to touch on or talk about, or? You there? You
So,
cool. Anything else you want to touch on? Are we having technical difficulties? Can you hear me, Darren? Well, I don't know what happened, but I think Darren's computer froze, so I just want to tell everyone I love you. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Eris. I love you. Kate, hello. Love you too. Darren does have a beautiful way of explaining things, you know. Eris, I'm going to have you on soon. I would love to conversate with you. You're a beautiful human, and thank you everyone for tuning in to episode 4 of PS What's Next. And next week I'll have another guest on, and cool. Love you guys.